Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to An Evening with Maggie Helwig, and thank you for joining us tonight. I think it's appropriate at the beginning of our time together to acknowledge the tragedy that took place in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, and we take just a quiet moment to remember to pray for all those who have been touched by this tragic event. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land that we are on for most of us is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. Some of us may be on land that is the traditional land of other First Nations people. We remember that the particular land that we are on is the land that's governed by the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1860. And we share this land in the terms of that treaty. This evening will take the form of a conversation. Archbishop Anne Germond will be in dialogue with Maggie about her work, her writing, and her ministry among people who are unhoused in the Kensington Market area of Toronto. A quick word about the Zoom format before we begin as well. All the participants are muted. I hope I'm the only one that had the mute demon chasing me around. And please be aware that this session is also being recorded. We will hear a brief first-person reflection from Silas Foxcroft, whose life has been deeply impacted by Maggie and by this ministry. Many of you submitted thoughtful questions in advance. Thank you. Those questions, along with the questions from members of the Social Justice Committee, will guide our conversation. If time permits, we may include additional questions submitted during the event. And now, as I turn things over to Archbishop Germond, I want to acknowledge also and to offer congratulations on this, the anniversary of her consecration. Archbishop Anne, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Bruce. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this very special evening that we have been planning with the Social Justice Committee of the Diocese of Algoma for several months. I first heard about Maggie Helwig. Well, I knew all about Maggie Helwig, but I first heard about this book, in fact, in September last year, when I met a man in Sault Ste. Marie, of all places, who said to me, there's a priest in the Diocese of Toronto whose book has been nominated for the award in Toronto. And the book is absolutely fabulous. It's called Encampment. And he said, I'm one of the judges. And so I hurried out to go and get a copy of the book, and couldn't put it down. Ordered several copies of it for Christmas gifts for friends of mine, and really wanted to have the opportunity for those of you who have read the book already, and those who may just be curious about the ministry that Maggie has been involved with for a number of years and continues to be involved with in her parish, St. Stephen's in the Fields in the Diocese of Toronto. So Maggie, a very warm welcome to you this evening. Congratulations on the award that you were given. Everything that I've read, when people ask you the question, so how's it been since you received the award? You've deflected that, being such a truly humble person. But we do extend our warm congratulations to you, because what you have written in this book is absolutely prophetic. This is a book about truth telling, about your experience and the experience of so many people who are living unhoused in Toronto. But all of us, I think whatever community we represent here this evening, also have many unhoused individuals who are struggling. And so I'm going to ask you, Maggie, just to say a few words about your background, just a little bit about how you came to, first of all, be a priest in the Anglican Church of Canada. You have been a social activist, I think, since you were 3 years old. You started a Greenpeace chapter in Kingston when you were 12, and I think your parents were pretty influential in some of your drive towards social activism. But why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you came to be a priest in the Diocese of Toronto, and how all of what we have read about in Encampment unfolded for you in a few minutes, and then I'll ask some specific questions about the book.
Okay, my entire life story in a few minutes. You know what? I don't deflect talk of the award because I'm that humble, really. It's because the city managed to utterly undermine their own award by clearing the encampment in less than 24 hours afterwards. So the award became almost an irrelevance. How did I end up as an Anglican priest? I was brought up without any particular religious faith. My parents were not religious people. My father did, however, sing in an Anglican choir. Because if you're a gifted amateur and you want to go where the good choral music is, that's where you go.
Bad.
So I heard him rehearsing, and that was in a certain sense my first theological education. I was always aware that, unusually for my family, I felt that kind of need in my life. I felt the need for some kind of religious, spiritual grounding. And I investigated fairly widely. But I kept coming back to the central Christian narrative as something that seemed profound and rich and complex in a way that I felt like I could inhabit for a long time. And the choice of the Anglican Church was in part just because my father sang in an Anglican church and he kind of liked the priest, and so he introduced us and we talked. Partly also because it was the church of T.S. Eliot and John Donne. And if you come from a literary family, you know, the church of T.S. Eliot and John Donne, of course, that's a church. I felt a call to ordained ministry very quickly after I was baptized, which was when I was 19. But I also knew I wouldn't be very good at it at that time.
Bad at it.
Simone, you can't interrupt like that. I didn't have the right temperament, skills, experience. It was not something I had it to do. I would sit in the pews and look at the priests up at the altar and think I should be up there doing that. And I actually just assumed that everyone sitting in the pews was thinking that. It took me a really long time to realize, no, that is not actually the common experience of everybody sitting in the pews. But
You're too silly.
Ordination was something I shelved for a long time. And I went off and I was a writer, a human rights activist, accumulated a bunch of life experience, learned how to talk to people. Learned how to interact socially, which was something that took me a very long time.
You're too silly. You are.
Simone, I need to concentrate on this.
No fish. No.
And, you know, eventually some people at the parish that I was at the time sort of pushed me to actually test this out and enroll at Trinity and start the process of discernment, and things went pretty rapidly from there.
Thank you. Thank you. My first question is a quote from quite close to the end of the book. This is what you say as you reflect on the encampment and what happened at the end. Is it a story of defeat then in the end? Not able to preserve the churchyard as a place of sanctuary? Unable to get the unhoused off the street? Almost everyone is living in an encampment, just a different one. Unable to turn a vast political and economic system devoted to protecting the wealth of a very few. But then you go on to say this: we, the church, the encampment residents, the we that is all of us, that we held that space for more than 2 years is not nothing. And you go on to describe the encampment as a little ark in the yard for a while, a place of refuge against the flood, a place where we preserved what we could. And so I wonder if you could speak for a few minutes about that ark, that place of safety, even though for so many of us looking in from the outside, it seemed anything but still anything but safe. But for those people who had that place for a while, you describe it as an ark, and you talk about the team that was around you. It wasn't just a solo venture. You had people around you. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that ministry with all the volunteers who were there with you, how you supported one another, and how that community was truly formed?
I think if we want to talk about the encampment as a place of safety and how it is that, although many people don't perceive that, we do need to step away from the church and the volunteers. We need to talk about unhoused people creating community and safety themselves, because that's happening, has happened in many places. And it's one of the things that people don't understand about encampments. I wrote the book in part because I know that most people who aren't in that world walk past an encampment and it looks like horror. It looks dirty. It looks like, how could people conceivably choose this over a city-run shelter? Because that is a choice some people are making. Nobody's choosing it over housing, but some people choose encampment living over municipally run shelters, and that doesn't make sense unless you're really in that world. Because as frightening as encampments may look to people who aren't familiar with them, they actually are genuine communities, and they are really the safest way to live if you are unhoused. They are far safer than living alone and atomized on the street, where you're vulnerable to so many things. And they're safer than most municipally run shelters. They are, in many ways, despite the issue of being outside in the cold and in some extreme temperatures, they are in many ways a solution which offers people dignity, autonomy, safety, and a community which they are able to build and support around them. Shelters tend to be run in a way that destroys community, and they're not very healthy places to be. So understanding encampments is something that people are creating. People in a great deal of affliction and in a situation that they shouldn't be in are creating something real and meaningful and important. That was part of what I was trying to communicate. And it's not just our encampment. I know our encampment. I can speak about it in a lot of detail because I know it, but it is why people have been choosing encampments, and why it is, to me, so tragic that municipal and provincial authorities seem absolutely determined to prevent people from living in any kind of community, absolutely determined to atomize all unhoused people and scatter them across the landscape and make them hide and make them not have others around them. And it's really destructive.
I am hiding it more.
Okay. And that's part of what I was trying to make people understand, that encampments are not terrible places. They're not just this sort of black hole of suffering. They are homes. People feel them to be their homes very deeply. They are safety. They are community. And I think that it's not so much that we at the church were, creating a community out of the encampment, is that we were privileged to be welcomed into the community that was in our yard. And it has been a privilege. And we have all learned a great deal from it, and we have developed relationships that have been real and sustaining, and which do continue even though the encampment has been destroyed. So yeah, that's a big part of what I wanted people to understand and what the book is trying to achieve.
Thank you. You say this in the book, Maggie: you don't go into this line of work without knowing you are going to be broken to pieces by trying to work within an inhumane and sometimes incomprehensible system, by caring about people and seeing them abused,
Go to the bathroom if you want.
treated like throwaways, seeing them suffer and bleed and die.
No bleeding.
And so how do you keep hope alive as someone who is really called to that ministry? How do you keep hope alive when you describe the work in such a way that going into it that you yourself are going to be broken by the ministry that is being offered? How do you keep hope alive?
Everybody asks me that. That is the number one question that I get asked. I don't have an answer. I don't know. Do I even have hope, or do I just keep going because the alternative is worse? I do what I do because it's right and it's good, and I would rather live in that reality than a reality in which we throw people away. Do I have hope? I'm not sure that I have hope. I have a problem with the word hope. It seems to suggest that I think things are going to get better, and I don't think things are going to get better. I think things are going to get worse. But in that, we are called to be the people who try still to be kind. And that's becoming an increasingly radical and marginalized and even dangerous thing to be. One of my volunteers, brilliant young woman, not a religious person at all, told me, the reason I like being around here and volunteering here is it's one of the few places where people still try to be kind to each other. And that's really fundamentally all that we're doing. We're in the place where we are with the people who are around us, and many of them are facing deep affliction and marginalization and institutional violence. But all we're trying to do is be people together.
And one of the things I really appreciated and loved is the stories that you shared and told about some of the residents in the encampment by name, right? Mm-hmm. We are all beloved of God. And so I think recognizing Christ in each person that was touched by each other in the encampment in a good way, I think was just calling out the belovedness in each of them. And that really resonated with me as I was reading the book. Maggie, I know that a lot of people in the church and certainly on this call want to ask the question. So for those of us who want to do something to help, what are the kinds of help that could be useful? And so again, I want to quote from the book, page 131. You talk about the good forms of help. The nurses who came to private consultations and offered primary care, the clothing and the harm reduction van that showed up. And then you also go on to talk about the less forms of help. 3 crates of rotting peaches and tomatoes dropped off. Bakery boxes filled with stale bread that attracted only rats and pigeons. And then the women, maybe more than one, maybe this happened more than once, a woman who drove up in an expensive car and threw out piles of old clothes, leaving the residents to clean it all up. We want to help. As you reflect back, what are some of the good kinds of ways that people like us, who aren't involved in that ministry day to day, but want to be kind and want to do something good? What are good kinds of help for us to do here in Northern Ontario, wherever we are today?
I mean, honestly, some of it is just common sense. If something is garbage to you, it's probably garbage to someone else too. You know, if you have food that you're trying to get rid of because you don't want it, don't just dump it on a homeless person. That's common sense. But beyond that, I mean, I'm not the voice of unhoused people, and there are no uniquely right answers. The only way you know what people need is to ask them. So I would challenge everybody, really, to start not by thinking, what is a helpful thing I can do, but how can I get to know someone? How can I build a relationship with one unhoused person, or 5 or 10, the people who come to the church for a meal, perhaps, or just the people who are on the corner? Build relationships, get to know them, get to know their names and their situations and their needs. And they can tell you what is useful and what is not useful. Because it's not going to be the same for everybody. We hired an outreach worker this year, and part of their job description is helping unhoused community members fulfill their self-identified needs. So their job description is not, we think that we know what you need and we're going to help you get it. We are going to let you identify your need and we will try to meet it. It has to be rooted in relationship. And sometimes the relationship is what's needed most. Sometimes just having human relationship, human connection, is actually the thing that is most needed. So yeah, I would challenge everybody to talk to at least one unhoused person. Get to know them.
Thank you.
In the late days of the encampment, when I had really lost all patience with some very hostile neighbors who were playing very dirty pool, I remember in one meeting just screaming at somebody over and over, tell me the name of one person in the encampment. Name one person, tell me their name. Which of course he couldn't, and of course he just kept deflecting that.
Yeah. You describe in your book that you engage more easily with the residents of the encampment. Can you talk just a little bit more about that sentiment that you truly are at home in that setting and with those individuals?
Yeah, I don't know. I just have really poor social skills and I don't fit in well in a world where people are supposed to be competent at things. Where people are supposed to know what to say or how to do or what good manners are. I don't fit in that world very well. The world that encampments are part of is a world of great honesty and great straightforwardness. And I think that above all is what makes me feel comfortable, is I don't feel like there's all these weird social games that I don't fully understand being played underneath the surface, because things are pretty upfront. I assume that I am somewhere on the autism spectrum, and this is part of why I find, the normal world so perplexing. But the honesty, the upfrontness of very marginalized people is very appealing to me. And it's just a world I've lived in for a long time. I know the rules, I know how things work. I have a lot of experience talking to people who have profound cognitive differences and differences of consciousness. And I find that communication really interesting. It's a form of cross-cultural communication that is really interesting to me. I don't know why. It's just...
Maggie, your sermons are beautiful, and you included quotes from some of your sermons in the book. And in your sermon on Reign of Christ Sunday, you exhort the congregation that you were preaching to at that time to hold on to the vision of a kingdom which is more like a body, which is a body that is in need of food and clothing and gentleness. And you go on to describe that as the body of Christ, as it comes to us in the bodies of those we encounter. People coming together not to fight against each other as some kind of enemy, but to share in the common work and common being as parts of a body share in a common life. Matthew's parable about the feeding of the hungry, you go on to say, and tending to the sick, the people weren't looking to do good. They were just responding to what was in front of them, and they did what they thought was right in that moment. But I say to you, Maggie, that it takes a person of courage to do what you do and what the volunteers in your church have been doing and continue to do day after day. I think it must feel a lot like David standing up to Goliath. And so looking back at it now, would you do it all over again? And were there times that it just felt so overwhelming and so immense that you were constantly brought back to that, this is the body of Christ and I'm a part of it, in those moments of feeling so overwhelmed?
I think there were a couple of questions there.
And there were.
I mean, would I do it over again? We're still doing it. The encampment isn't in our yard anymore, but we still know everyone who is there. We're still connected with them. We're still feeding, we serve about 500 meals a week. We do a lot of medical care, all kinds of other stuff. So that's all still going on. It's not stopped. Would I welcome an encampment back into the yard if the city took away the fences and the concrete blocks? In a moment, of course I would. Absolutely. The times when I have felt overwhelmed, it has not been because there was an encampment in my churchyard and that we were trying to support it and protect it. As people will know who read the book, much of this happened during a period of massive upheaval in my family life. Deep, serious problems in my family life. And that often felt overwhelming and unmanageable. And it was the work in the encampment that made me feel better, that made me able to keep going. And the people in the encampment who, if I was having a really shitty day, I could just walk out into the encampment and say, guys, I'm having a really shitty day. And they would be there for me. They're my community, they're my friends. So no, sometimes it's a lot of work, but that never felt overwhelming. That never felt impossible to bear. Never. They're my friends.
Thank you.
And I think a little bit from that sermon that you didn't quote when I talk about the sheep in the parable of the sheep and the goats is that they were doing it because it was on some level what they wanted to do. And I'm doing this because it is on some level what I want to do. And when I'm not able to spend as much time doing this kind of work because of what's still going on and juggling family things, that's harder for me because what I want to be doing is this work. And that's why I do it. It's very selfish, I suppose, really.
I would like to give Silas the opportunity to tell us a little bit about how Silas met you and just the impact that you've had on Silas's life. So Silas, where are you?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me and see me and everything?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for welcoming me into this. It was kind of random. I just connected with Connie at my local church, and we realized that this event was happening, and I was talking about coming to the church through Maggie. So I was asked to speak a bit about how I've been impacted by Maggie's ministry, and I did write some stuff down so that I would be mindful of the time. But first thought was how to talk about this in a way that would be minimally embarrassing to Maggie. I'll do my best in that regard, but in my own social context, having been a young activist in Toronto, I don't really view my experience with Maggie or St. Stephen's to be that unique. I feel like I'm like one of many people who had a similar experience with Maggie and with the community at St. Stephen's, but I recognize that in the scope of the Anglican Church at large, it is a pretty unique experience. I was living in Toronto in my early 20s and came from a liberal pagan family background, actually. My understanding of Christianity growing up was very much that Christianity and like the legacy of the Christian church was actually antithetical to social justice. And I was deeply invested in many different social justice movements. I was also really involved in the queer punk scene in Toronto, which is what brought me into the city. And so I feel like if somebody had told me as a teenager that I would wind up joining a church, I probably would have laughed in their face. Like I had no interest. I feel like I did have like a very deeply rooted, like as Maggie was saying, like spiritual, like a need for like a spiritual grounding, but it did not occur to me that I would wind up finding that through a Christian church. Although I feel like Maggie and I related to each other a lot on both being like adult converts to the church. I met Maggie when we were working on the People's Assembly for Climate Justice, which they were co-organizing with our mutual friend Dave Vasey, and I had been invited to give or to co-facilitate something on anti-fascism and climate change. I saw and heard through their reputation that Maggie embodied so deeply the politics and moral vision that I was attempting to dedicate myself to. And they did seem to possess this level of spiritual fortitude that I was very curious about, given that the work that um, I was doing, I was very much struggling with the spiritual weight of doing social justice activism in the context of massive environmental collapse and rising global fascism. I had no understanding of how churches typically work, so I remember like I walked in to St. Stephen's on a Wednesday and was just kind of like looking around, and I didn't like really see anybody right away, so I like went to leave, and Maggie is always, every time I go to the church, she's like in the middle of dealing with some kind of crisis of a community member. And so I kind of didn't want to bother. But I just asked if they gave out Bibles, and Maggie went into their office and got a Bible and gave it to me. I still have it. And I realized later that it was one of Maggie's personal Bibles that was like had an inscription that somebody had given it to them. Um, and yeah, we sat down and I talked about like feeling this need for like a deeper like spiritual grounding and not knowing where to start, and cried a bunch. And I feel like I cried like every single time I was in that building for like several months. But yeah, Maggie said that the if I was only going to read one part of the Bible, that I should read the gospel, and I did. And I really saw the words of Jesus like really speaking directly to like circumstances in my own life that I was struggling with. And um yeah, I became really deeply involved with St. Stephen's. Maggie hosted theological discussion groups pretty regularly that helped me like get on board with the very like the history of the Anglican Church and the theology of the Anglican Church. And also like Maggie and I share a very I think kind of mystical bent to our theology, and so it was like great to have groups of people to discuss that with, and that Maggie was able to like hold space for that at the same time that they were doing all of this like other like ministry with unhoused people at the same time. um and yeah, I would see Maggie and other members of the parish at protests that I was attending or organizing. Like I felt like the church community really blended actually very seamlessly into my life as an activist. Sorry, my phone keeps falling down as I'm trying to talk. But um, yeah, I helped co-found the Apple Crisp Action Brigade, which is the food serve program that was serving the Moss Park overdose prevention site. Um, I came to think of Maggie as a mentor and a close friend, and became connected with many other people in the Toronto Christian peace community who wound up getting me involved in lay preaching and pursuing a form of ministry education in Minnesota. I had amazing life-changing experiences through this, um, like through this journey through the church and through Christian community that I accessed through St. Stephen's. And I really don't know if I ever would have set foot in a church if it wasn't for Maggie's ministry. That she was really able to speak to the heaviness, like the real grief and pain that a lot of us who are doing social justice activism are carrying. And I feel like a lot of other priests in my experience, like it's a little bit more stand-up comedy, or it's a little bit more, you know, alleviating people of a feeling of guilt or something like that. But like Maggie could be very present with suffering. She'd be very present with the suffering of others. And I feel like that's something that I really needed, and I think many other people really need to be able to come into a church community in a way that feels emotionally safe and honest. Um, and so I'm also a transgender person, and like as a trans person, my gender was never a topic of conversation. It was never a controversy. I was one of many trans people that were attending the church, many queer people who were attending the church, and so I'm quite unique in having like no baggage towards like Christianity or the church for feeling like an outsider in those ways. At least I didn't until I left Toronto, and then I was trying to find other Christian groups that share the same moral vision that brought me into Christianity in the first place. And with St. Stephen's as my entry point, I really believed that having a dedicated ministry to the most marginalized people in society was the popular vision of Christ in the world, and was the popular vision of like what ministry looked like, because I wasn't raised in the church and I had no other experience with it. And I've since found that to be disappointingly rare, I will say. It's a very unique and strange experience to come into St. Stephen's as your first touchstone of Christianity and then realize that most churches don't like that. And it's honestly been really challenging. And I still identify St. Stephen's as like my home church, or like the place that I feel the most like spiritually aligned with. Um, when I heard that Maggie wrote a book, to be honest, it took me a long time to get around to reading it. Not for any particular reason, but like I knew that they'd written other books before, and based on their sermons, I assumed that they were an excellent writer, but I've never placed Maggie on a pedestal of being like a celebrity author, or like anything above who I know them to be as a priest and as a friend. Um, I think the work of their life is so incredible, and they deserve any and all accolades and awards that they receive for Encampment. And the work that they've done, that like they humbly kind of explore in the book. I don't want to diminish the impact of that at all, but I also am very wary of placing Maggie, I guess, in a special role that is above the rest of Christian community, because I think that that's something that I've struggled since leaving St. Stephen's, is that I find in other churches St. Stephen's is placed as an exceptional example and not as um like a baseline. And you know, I have an enormous amount of respect for Maggie and St. Stephen's, but I'm worried that what Maggie is doing should not be seen as exceptional or be seen as like superhuman. Um, I remember in one of the first sermons that I ever heard them give, they talked about the Christian and activist inclination towards martyrdom as an interpretation for what it means to give our lives to God. Maggie argued that it is a greater and more difficult thing to give an entire life of service, not just to give our lives as in premature dramatic death, but to give a full, like a life in full, lived in service to God and our siblings in Christ. And Maggie is doing that. And I think that I would just like to emphasize that while Maggie is in a unique position of being the parish priest of a historically impoverished um, church in downtown Toronto, and that's a unique social position to be in. The calling to minister to the poor is not unique to Maggie. And I think that it is all of our calling. And I hope that Maggie's book will inspire others to take up the true and difficult responsibilities that we are called to as followers of Christ, and through collective action lighten the weight of justice that is everyone's to bear.
Thank you. Maggie, a response to that, and then the members of the Social Justice Committee have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, I remember very vividly this moment of decision, because you had come in the door and I'm like, okay, here is this young person who really clearly needs to talk about faith right now. And also, here's a guy in the parish hall bleeding from his head, yelling, "Fuck off, bitch! Fuck off, bitch!"
I remember
and,
that.
yeah. And luckily, I had a theological student placed with me at that point, and I was like, "Stephen, here's your job. Go deal with Mr. Fuck off, bitch in the parish hall. Make sure he's okay, figure out what to do." And the parish administrator was there too. And I gather they told me afterwards that there were as many as 8 paramedics involved at one point.
Oh my gosh.
But it was like, okay, we're just gonna have to dispose our resources here. But that was a good moment.
Thank you.
And no, I also wanted to say, I really, really thank you for not wanting to treat me as a celebrity.
I don't
because
think
I
I could.
really
No
do feel
offense.
I am feeling a bit oppressed at this point by, I'm like the celebrity of homelessness, and you know, as you have said, this is in fact the calling of the church.
Mhm,
It is something I do with a community, not by myself.
mhm,
And I do not speak for homeless people.
mhm,
I'm not homeless.
mhm,
I have good friends who are homeless, and I try to amplify their voices as much as I can. But like one of the weird things about doing events for this book outside of Toronto is I don't have my folks with me.
mm,
And that feels weird and strange to be talking about the encampment and like I don't have pirate there. I gotta have pirate there. It's not real if I don't have pirate there. Um, so yeah, it's not a me thing. It it
mhm.
is it is the calling of the body of Christ.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Connie, you had a question.
Connie, you're muted.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to go to Terry's question and then we'll go back to Connie. So, Terry, your question is around prejudices towards the unhoused.
Yes, thank you. Reverend Maggie, I really appreciate that you look at a homeless person in a much different manner than most. Could you talk about how you see a homeless person? Because for me, it's the key to understanding and appreciating the whole book.
I would see a homeless person as a person. I mean, you don't lead with homeless. It's a person. It's a person that you're there talking to. And like any other person, you have to figure out how you relate to them and who they are and what their needs and desires and gifts are. And in that way, also, they are the presence of Christ. That any person that we encounter is in that moment the presence of Christ for us. That I think this is a fundamental theological point. The body of Christ is the body of all human persons. But there is certainly reason to believe that the presence of Christ is particularly sharply brought home to us in the presence of persons who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who are oppressed by the systems of our day, because they are living through much of what Jesus lived through in his own life, and they are the people who were the primary objects of his relationship and concern in his life. So it's not different from talking to any other person, but talking to any person is to encounter Christ.
And we need not fear them.
No, God, no. I mean, homeless people are victims of violence overwhelmingly. And if they are encountering you, a housed person, for the first time, they will be afraid of you because you have much more ability to hurt them than they have to hurt you.
Right.
So yeah, understand if you are speaking to an unhoused or marginalized person for the first time from your position of privilege, because we're all speaking from a position of privilege, you are the one who is frightening. You are the one who has the ability to hurt.
Right. Such a key point. Thank you.
Connie.
Yes. We have trouble communicating, even though we have so many ways of communicating.
Rob's wife.
Yes. So, Maggie, you
Chaplain
have
Rob's
been
wife.
in dialogue.
Speaking.
You've been in dialogue with government policymakers and various agencies. How can we best make approaches for change? To the powers that be, the system? No answer to that either.
I mean, if I knew that, I would probably, if I knew that, I'd have changed a lot more policy by now.
Right.
You know, I try every tactic that I can think of. Does it work? Not very often. You know, we just keep trying. I feel like, you know, the city of Toronto was able to give me an award for this book and then dismantle the encampment less than 24 hours later. And the book, pretty clearly, I wrote the book because I wanted to change the conversation around encampments, and specifically I wanted to protect our encampment, and that is one reason I wrote it. And clearly it did not do that, or the city of Toronto would not have swept in the day after the award ceremony and torn up everybody's homes. So I don't know.
We should try.
We just keep trying. We just keep trying. Yeah.
And there may be in that trying a Damascus Road experience for somebody.
Yeah.
In power.
Yeah. And I don't think there's any one right or wrong way to do it. Everybody can just use whatever tools are at their disposal.
Writing letters, attending meetings, being a presence there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sandy.
Hi there. Your book is so wonderfully moving. And one of the pieces that I loved in it was when you talk about encampments being a place of grace, creativity, community, healing, and mutual support. Is what I'm hearing you say is we need to develop those relationships one person at a time, by talking to one person and moving on to the next person and moving on to the next one. Is that the best way for us to extend that love and grace beyond an encampment into our churches, our communities?
I don't quite understand the question. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So the question is, how do you think the best approach is to extend love and grace, the kind that people felt inside their encampment, from us who are outside the encampment?
I mean, again, it is about being in relationship with people.
Okay.
And a genuine relationship, a mutually vulnerable relationship. Because these people have dealt with a lot of bullshit. And they're really good at recognizing it. And if you are not prepared to be mutually vulnerable, and if you are not prepared to be responsible in that encounter, they will know. And they will shut you down. And they'll be like, okay, lady, have a nice day. Bye-bye. But yeah, it's about relationship, and it's about the willingness to be mutually vulnerable.
I think that's great. But what do you actually mean by mutually vulnerable?
I mean that I will talk to people in the encampment about stuff that I've done wrong and stuff that's wrong in my life. And I don't behave as if I'm the nice church lady for whom everything is basically under control, helping the poor people who can't get their lives together. I'm a deeply fucked up person interacting with other deeply fucked up people. And also being touched by them. That their pain genuinely touches me. It's not a performance. It's not a thing that I think I should feel. They're my friends, and if they're in pain, it hurts me too. And when they die, I have lost somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a mutuality in that relationship, right? Yeah. It's a two-way. It's a two-way.
Yeah.
Maggie, a number of people have asked about supporting St. Stephen's, and so we're going to put that address into the chat for people to respond if they would like individually. The Diocese of Algoma is going to make a donation, and we just wanted to ask. I know Bruce wanted to ask if there were other ways that we could be supporting your ministry in Toronto, beyond praying for you, because I think prayer is also a good thing to be doing, especially now.
Thank you. No, I mean, obviously we welcome prayers, and obviously we welcome donations if people want to make donations, because we have a new outreach worker. I'm hoping we can extend their hours because they're doing fantastic work. We're underwriting somebody's rental expenses right now because it was the only way we could get them into housing, so that all helps. But I would rather people not focus on supporting St. Stephen's, again, as Silas said, that we shouldn't be the sop to the conscience of the church in general. I used to worry that when I was a layperson, people in my parish would say, "Oh, we don't have to worry about social justice because Maggie does that." And I don't want people to think, our parish doesn't have to do this work because St. Stephen's is doing it. Find your own context. It's going to be different than mine, but there is going to be suffering out there. There's going to be suffering, and there is going to be power grinding people down, and there's going to be people who need whatever it is that we might be able to offer them, and who need to be brought in. We need to be brought into their community, and they need to be brought into ours, because we're not complete without each other. Gregory of Nyssa has a sermon that he preached in, 3rd century Cappadocia about all the people who say, well, all those lepers on the street, somebody should look after them somewhere far away from here, ideally. And he's like, you know what, you just get out there. You just sit down with the lepers. You touch them, because you're the one who's sick, and they're the ones who are going to heal you. So yeah, find your context and do whatever is right there.
Thank you. We realize and recognize, Maggie, that you have to leave pretty sharply at 8 o'clock, and Reverend Anne Camber would like to say a few words.
Well, hello. My name's Reverend Anne Camber. I'm a member of this Diocesan Social Justice Committee, which is a privilege. I'm also the incumbent of Gathering Table in Thunder Bay, and we're an inner city church like yours in Thunder Bay. And so we have a food cupboard ministry, and we do a lot of work with the vulnerable. So everything you said, Maggie, has just touched my heart. I just was in tears for most of this. Thank you for sharing your love and your experience and your wisdom about serving people who are so near and dear to the heart of God and the message of the gospel. And that's those who are poor and unhoused and vulnerable. That's God's heart, that we serve them so much. And I also want to say thank you to some other people. I want to say thank you to Silas for your willingness to share your story and your connection with the ministry of Reverend Maggie, and for the people of St. Stephen's. And thank you, Archbishop Anne, for your support for bringing this important topic to and this webinar and to Algoma Diocese, and for your skillful moderation of this last hour. We really appreciate that. Thank you to Michelle Hauser, our diocesan communications officer, for a masterful job of promoting this event and for managing the webinar, and your guidance of the Social Justice Committee as we prepared for tonight. Thank you to all my fellow members of the Social Justice Committee, to Sandy Drindak, Reverend Bruce McLeish, Connie Knighton, and Terry Kett, it's always a joy to work with you. Some of us have been working together for a number of years, so we really mesh together and do a lot of work together. Thank you for everyone who attended this webinar on a very pressing topic in our day. In every community that we represent, I pray you take back what you learned to your home parishes and your home churches and communities. And let's always keep those vulnerable neighbors very close to our hearts in prayer, and be ready to serve and aid as we are called to do in our baptismal covenant.
Thank you. Maggie, I know you have to leave, but would you leave us with your blessing? Please, would you give us a blessing before you leave? And if there's anybody who would like to stay on for 10 minutes after Maggie's given us a blessing and wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about your impressions of the book or any feedback you wanted to give about ministry that's happening in your own context, I'm going to stay on for about 15 minutes. But Maggie, we would love you to bless us, please, as we take our leave of one another.
The peace of God, which passes understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you this night and evermore. Amen. And thank you all.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much for blessing us this evening, and we hope it wasn't too disruptive for your family.
That's all right.
We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.